On semiotic economics, the realm of values is dominated by insoluble conflict, hence by the necessity of continuous compromises. Nobody can definitively decide how the compromises should be made, unless it be a, in scare quotes, revealed, end scare quotes, religion. Max Weber, in a letter to Robert Windelbrandt, April 2nd, 1913. The basic concepts of value in economics and the notion of compromises, politics as not the rational place of deliberation, but the place of the art of the compromise, or in Trump's way of stating it, we could probably say the art of the deal. Although I don't think very many deals were struck between the conflicting parties in the recent American situation due to the flat animosity. For example, the Supreme Court confirmations of justices were handled on down the line party basis, party vote, not on the basis of any real evaluation of the candidates, as was still something which we could see in Reagan's time. We could see there was still real discussion between the parties about the candidates for the Supreme Court, including the Bork case, where there was lots of people who went against their party on that case. And on Scalia was brought in unanimously, and I guess Kennedy was brought in almost unanimously, even though they were both conservative Republican candidates. So I want to look at the simple formula Marx minus Aristotle plus Heidegger as the formula for a basic semiotic economics. So we have Franco Berardi as the major theorist of something like this, but I'm not referring to that almost at all, but I'm just taking the concept as it seems to fit for what one may describe to be the case. But what one may describe to be the case must always come somehow in the light of some ideas, otherwise there's no way to analyze them. So we have this Adam Smith and Marx tradition, which are basically almost Adam Smith and Marx are basically almost identical in their strictly speaking, in their economic theory. And then this Berardi, for instance, is one of these guys who they say is quote unquote Marxist, as one can say of many of the many current professors are Marxist in some vague sense. And then you get, at the extreme point, you get people that are basically totally uneducated, like Richard Wolff, who will actually positively tell their followers not to be hostile towards the attempt to understand what that means and what technical terms mean in the tradition and the intellectual history. But then you get other people like the EGS people, like many sociologists in the elite and semi-elite universities, who will say quite a bit about uh, Marxist um, tradition rather than Marx himself. But here I just wanted to speak not about Marxist tradition as a so-called emancipatory tradition or as a progressive um, movement, near progressive analogous movement, or um, Marx as anything except economic theorist. So the modern economics starts with basically with Thomas Hobbes and with his personal student David Petty, who wrote a book called Political Arithmetic. And then we go on almost immediately to Adam Smith. And in Marx, the simplest way, and I try to state things in the most simple and almost the most crude way. Marx says money and things you can sell, commodities, are equivalent. They make an equivalence as soon as they enter the market. And then what Marx says is that the real value of something, following something, is modified by the market in such a way that we get the so-called exploitation and the so-called surplus, the so-called surplus value. So what Marx wants to say is it must readily explained through pointing to Aristotle. Aristotle says, Aristotle has this general Greek view, which in some way corresponds to the biblical view that the love of money, not money, but the love of money is the root of all evil. But the way the Greeks state something quite similar is that money ought to be regarded as a convenience for the polis, for letting things happen, but it shouldn't be allowed to be something that's there for its own sake. The ruler of the polis should shut things down as soon as money becomes just a matter for its own sake, in order to let order flowing from the laws flowing from rational laws control, rather than the confusion that comes out of the market controlling things. For instance, as with Dionysus in Sicily, the tyrant Dionysus in Sicily shutting down some people who were cornering the market on olives, I think it was, and therefore removing some money from from the economy of Sicily, which isn't really helpful at that time. So he just outlawed certain behavior outright. But so in this case, Marx has a notion of that everybody should get paid the natural value of their work. Marx believes in personal money rather than private property. The private property, let's say, goes with the market. Anything modified by the market becomes somehow tainted, and not somehow tainted, but let's say exactly how it's tainted. It's tainted in the following way. Let's make the whole economy an analogy with Aristotle saying that the mother's milk, in essence, what it's for, its telos, is to feed the baby. So you could take so that's the proper use of the milk. That's the natural personal use of the milk. And then there's another use, which is you could bottle that milk and put it on the market and sell it, and all kinds of things could happen. That's when you get into what Marx is calling ideology, and after Napoleon's denouncement of ideology, and which was a new word in around 1800 or so, I think, somehow following Locke's confusing way of talking about ideas, which broke from the traditional way of speaking of ideas. Once you get the market, then you get a break from the proper use of everything and the proper value of everything, according to that. So then the whole of Marxism then looks like this attempt to go back to this proper or natural value of things, to the personal property, to what everyone ought to have according to nature, just like the milk ought to be used to feed the baby according to nature, but instead it's been modified in a deleterious way by the market, so that now there's all sorts of confusion. Okay, so if you subtract Aristotle from that, and you just have the market, and you forget about any notion of a natural level of price, then you come more into this diamond and water paradox and the marginalist and the modern way of thinking about economy, which now totally dominates. So that's already kind of mainstream, but there's a confusion about it because we don't know how to make the move from Adam Smith and Marx and so on into our modern notion. There's like a vestigial hanging on to the notion of the natural value will be discovered, or somehow some policies will be passed to make that happen. So no, but how to bring this into pure semiotic capitalism in connection to Heidegger's word that language is the house of being. So far as anything can be exchanged for money, copyright of ideas and the connection of ideas to sales, branding, Trump selling his name to put on things, for instance. So far as this becomes equivalent to anything language can express and then be packaged and then be monetized, one can see that the market becomes a place which is equivalent to the whole of the human world in some way. And then you'll see a tension between the semiotic economy, which includes the whole of the human world, which is then capital and also equivalent to money, as public money, as money that trades on the market. Then one can see that there's a question of, if we put that in the frame of something like industrial, military-industrial complex, you see that the side of the military side of it is really the scientific side, where up until about the year 1900, you still had the claim that the side of the Aristotle side, which could tell you scientifically the milk is really for this, and that's a normative, or this work really ought to be paid this amount, and that's a scientific, that would be regarded as a philosophic or scientific statement, which in other words it would regard as knowledge. Science and knowledge is the same thing. Philosophy and knowledge were meant to be the same thing, but philosophy has fallen out of favor. Experimental nihilistic science has come into favor, so that the notion that you could say this is the correct price fell away. And then we get this situation where instead what we are compelled to believe in is what the experimental sciences can do with the military, which then gives you kind of a hard center of knowledge about what will guide the whole of the economy, so that you could make, so then when Heidegger speaks of the technological essence, he doesn't speak then of a semiotic capitalism in the sense of just anything goes, but rather it has a certain engine, which is that everything is being used by especially by the basic science of physics, as a kind of place to mine for new materials, for new guidance in AI for computers that think better than humans so they can replace the humans and be paid more than the humans, just as the things in the time of the Luddites, when the machines were getting better at physical labor. Now they're, of course, much better at many mental tasks and many logistic operations, so that the notion of the cybernetics works in there with the military-industrial complex, so far as the military becomes more like something which is totally controlled by the technological essence, which is by unthinking movement, which nevertheless beats the thinking human being in so many ways. In this sense, it seems like there's a direction to any analysis in a full-out semiotic economy where you identify money with everything that exists, because anything that exists, including ideas, can be exchanged for money. So money is identical to everything that exists, but it seems to have a specific form or direction based on scientific thinking, which is the thinking which has the modified form of the tradition, which is philosophy understood as knowledge, becomes instead the wertfrei or value-free knowledge of so-called experimental science. And then you can see what Max Weber is talking about here, the contrast between this need to compromise or to fight over the values in politics, as contrasted with a quote-unquote revealed religion. Only a revealed religion could put a stop to that conflict, because our Dasein does not regard normative statements as knowledge. It's fallen prey to the military-industrial complex, in the sense that military is to be identified with this leading authority on what knowledge is for our Dasein. So if anybody could make any sort of interpolations into that, kind of poke around and ask questions about where we could go further in this general statement of the what economy has become, which is as all general statements are, very vague, although I think true so far as something very vague is true and therefore not necessarily that useful. If something we could get more concrete in there, that might give us more purchase, just as a hammer gets purchase on a nail to rip it out of a wall with the back of the hammer. We might be able to get more purchase on it if we can get into some of the closer points and away from the highest level of generality on that.